We'll talk about rationality in death and compare and contrast how we find those things in Corpus Hermeticum, Book 1, and contrasted with the account of Genesis in the Bible, Genesis Book 2 and 3. So let's first talk about the one that most people are familiar with, the account of rationality in death and Genesis. So in the Garden of Eden is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So that's interesting because it's not the tree of knowledge per se, it's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In other words, it's the tree of moral agency, you know, and to I believe that is reason, is rationality. It's what gives us moral agency, our ability to use our minds, in to think rationally and to plan and to consider things. So that story is about taking on the power of rationality, of moral agency, and that makes Adam and Eve like God. It gives them a godlike mind. So that's interesting. So it's already saying that, you know, that basically we possess a part of godlike mind through our rationality. But how did we get it? We had to steal it, all right? We were forbidden from taking that. So before we had that, we didn't have any moral agency, we didn't have rationality, we didn't have an ability to think in the future. Our eyes were closed, right? Because remember when Adam and Eve took a bite of the apple, then their eyes were open and they saw that they were naked. So they were blind. So in the period before we had the power, you know, before we ate of the apple, you know, we were blind, we were irrational, didn't think, couldn't plan for the future, couldn't think of things, had no moral agency really. So it's interesting, but we had to steal it. Okay, so we had to defy God to take that power of our minds. And in doing so, that's what brought us death. Okay, and I think it's arguable that it's now we're, you know, because we have our minds that can think of the future, we're now aware of death. You know, so maybe that's a way of looking at it. But that, you know, we know we are mortal. We see our mortality, whatever. But the point is that because we are rational, now we experience death, and you know, because we disobeyed God, we have this sin, and so now, you know, now we're experiencing death, but we have this power of God, right? So that's interesting. But now contrast that with the story in the Corpus Hermeticum, Book 1. Okay? So in that story, our rational minds is a gift from God. And basically, it is what is meant when, you know, the phrase, because the phrase is in there just as it's in Genesis, God fashioned man in his own image, okay? And basically what that means to the Corpus Hermeticum is that in his own image means in having the same mind and power of mind. So similarly to the Genesis account, the power of the mind, our mental faculty, our power of reason and of moral agency is what makes us godlike. But in the Corpus Hermeticum, it is a gift from God. And death does not come from the gift. Death comes from our rejecting the gift or ignoring the gift. So if we look at later verses in that book, it contrasts the person who like embraces the mind or embraces, the godlike mind versus a person who craves after bodily pursuits. So it's like, so basically, I mean, in a nutshell, the story is that God created man. Man descended to earth just out of curiosity, basically, just to kind of check things out. It's like, oh, this is interesting. And that pure man, like, fell in love with earth, fell in love with nature, had sex with nature. Nature becomes a mother, as Mother Nature, I guess, right? And that's where humanity comes from. So it's a contrast of, like, our godlike mind versus our bestial instincts in our bodies, right? So death and suffering come from ignoring our gift from God and embracing our the physical realm, and ignoring the spiritual, basically. So it's an interesting contrast. On the one hand, Genesis says it wasn't a gift, it was stolen, and we're suffering because we stole it. On the other hand, it was a gift, and we suffer to the extent that we ignore it. So, I mean, I prefer the Hermetic accounts, quite frankly, and it just seems to put us in a better place, as far as what the story says about us and how we should behave and what we should do, and where we stand in the cosmology of things. It just,